Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Over the years, the world of Street Fighter has introduced to us a cast of many colourful characters, with a huge amount of them now being considered fighting game legends. The iconic roster has more than made its mark on gaming, with the likes of Ken, Chun-Li, M. Bison and company making appearance after appearance across various video games and other forms of visual media. In today's episode, we are going to be covering yet another fighter from this historic franchise, as we delve into the undertold tale of FeiLong. According to this channel's comment section, this is a character that a lot of people here are big fans of. But at the end of the day, was this new challenger anything more than just a Bruce Lee ripoff? Let's find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of FeiLong. Yeah! Growing up with Street Fighter 2 in the early 90s was a magical time to be a gamer. Not were we just experiencing a video game that would change arcades and fighting games forever, but we were in the company of a title with one of the most memorable lineups of characters that had ever been conceived. All 12 fighters brought something unique and unforgettable to the table, etching themselves in the minds of players and influencing gamers overall for years to come. 1993 would be an exciting year for the game, as not only would they make another update of Street Fighter 2, but they would include yet another 4 new characters. Amongst this foursome, the game titled Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers would introduce to players the exciting prospect of being able to play as FeiLong, a character who seemed to look and move like legendary film star and martial artist Bruce Lee. Now including a character based on such a fighting legend fit the theme of the game perfectly. Hell, we already had a boxer who was practically Mike Tyson, and a Muay Thai fighter named Sagat, who looked suspiciously like the real-life Muay Thai world champion fighter Sagat Pechindi. So, influence from real life of a Street Fighter franchise was at this point almost expected. While we will dive into the differences and similarities between FeiLong and Bruce Lee shortly, let me first touch on why a Bruce Lee based character was arguably the most perfect homage to feature in the game as of yet. Apart from the fact that Bruce Lee and Hong Kong martial arts movies had helped popularise martial arts in the West, Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior took more inspiration from Bruce Lee's career than one would think, and all of this relates to the smash hit movie known as Enter the Dragon. There were many similarities between this classic flick and the iconic game, as aside from both of them featuring a plot whereby challengers from around the world would face off in a martial arts tournament, the leading villains in each piece have striking similarities. The dictator known as M. Bison, or Vega, depending where you live in the world, plays the role in Street Fighter 2 of being a crime lord, hosting a fighting tournament, with this plot and character replicating Enter the Dragon's crime lord and main villain known as Han, who is hosting a tournament of his own. In terms of shamelessly ripping off this movie, Street Fighter 2's crime lord is being pursued by a female undercover cop Chun-Li, which again directly copies Enter the Dragon's female undercover operative Mai Ling, who is pursuing Han. Now you could be thinking, big deal right, 2 characters in the game that link to this movie. However, when you dig a little deeper, it quickly becomes clear that earlier in its development, that the entirety of Street Fighter 2 was set to be an Enter the Dragon homage. Not only was a crime lord set to run a tournament, but he was set to do so on his own private island, wherein which the entire game would have taken place. Essentially, M. Bison would have owned his own island just like Han in the Kung Fu favourite. Some design from this earlier concept would make it into the final game, such as the island's port area being repositioned as Ken's stage. So bringing all that we know into account, the inspiration Street Fighter 2 took from Enter the Dragon is clear to see. So a Bruce Lee lookalike being thrown into the mix in 1993 made perfect sense really. Street Fighter 2 is pretty much built for FeiLong. FeiLong, like Bruce Lee, originates from Hong Kong and debuts in the World Warrior tournament in the Super Street Fighter 2 plot, after appearing in a string of action movies. It is of note that FeiLong is Chinese for Flying Dragon, which is similar to Bruce Lee's Chinese screen name that was Little Dragon. His fighting style in the game is obviously a type of Kung Fu that features a variety of acrobatic kicks and rigid strikes. FeiLong can bob and weave his way around the playfield, putting pressure on opponents, allowing him to close gaps and strike hard at the right opportunities. In Super Street Fighter 2, FeiLong became well known for executing two special techniques: the Rekaken, a series of rushing punches, and the Rising Dragon Leg, a jumping flaming kick. Throughout the World Warrior tournament, it would dawn on FeiLong that he much preferred fighting in real life in comparison to the staged, choreographed fight scenes in movies that he had become accustomed to. Still, if players can beat the game using this character, a movie director comes and congratulates FeiLong, attempting to sign him up for a new movie deal. But FeiLong declines, choosing to return to the world of real martial arts. The Western version of the game does offer a bit of extra dialogue though, with FeiLong stating there can never be another legend like the Great One and his son. Basically referencing Bruce Lee and his son Brandon Lee coexist alongside FeiLong in Capcom USA Street Fighter universe. Weird. The early 90s was obviously a super hot time for the Street Fighter franchise. So while Street Fighter 2 started life out as a game that would be based on the movie Enter the Dragon, by 1994 Street Fighter would have its very own live action movie to call its own. Sadly though, FeiLong was the only character from the new Challengers to not be featured in live action form, with the reason for his absence being rather interesting in its own right. The lack of FeiLong in the flick appears to stem from the fact that the movie would feature actor Kenya Sawada. Interestingly, Sawada would audition to play the role of Ryu, but by this point not only had the movie staff chosen Byron Mann for the role, but Sawada spoke very little English, so casting him in such a prominent role made no sense. Still, Capcom of Japan loved this Japanese actor, so it seems they would remove the Bruce Lee-esque FeiLong character from the story and create a new character bespoke for the movie known as Sawada, who would be named after, well, Sawada. What makes this all the more hilarious was that all of this was done on the basis that Capcom of Japan intended to build an entire movie empire around this man, but it would appear that he would end up to Capcom what Tom McGee would end up to Vince McMahon in the World Wrestling Federation. Now that's an obscure reference. His movie career with Capcom would end up limited to his appearance in Street Fighter, where amusingly he would only be seen speaking and fighting a couple of times within the film. Yet he ends up posing with the famous cast of Street Fighter characters at the end of the movie, leaving audience members everywhere scratching their heads in confusion. What on earth was going on here? This marketing disaster that seems to have led to FeiLong getting cut would mean that Sawada would also feature as a player fighter in the Street Fighter the movie video games, and to really rub salt in the wound, Sawada's ending features a remix of FeiLong's stage soundtrack. While this was a dark time for our hero, fortunately this would not be the end of his tale. The same year the live-action Street Fighter movie hit cinemas, a Japanese animated Street Fighter 2 film would also be produced, with this one including our favourite Bruce Lee lookalike. While only making minor appearances, some representation is better than nothing, eh? And these segments are pretty cool to say the least. In the movie, he has a hard-hitting one-on-one dream match with Ryu, even unleashing some of his trademark manoeuvres from the game in the process. While ultimately losing this bout, he comes to terms with his loss later in the movie after learning that Ryu was the man who beat Sagat a few years earlier. To make FeiLong in this animation all the cooler though, is that in the English translation of the movie, FeiLong was voiced by none other than a young Bryan Cranston. The same Bryan Cranston who would go on to play drug dealer Heisenberg in the hit show Malcolm in the Middle. Now that's what I call FeiLong star power. While on the subject of animations, FeiLong would also be a part of Street Fighter 2V, the Japanese episodic TV series. FeiLong will be first introduced as a student of Chun-Li's father. One day, thinking it is a real fight, he storms a movie set, injuring various stuntmen in the process. Rather than apologising, he proceeds to tell an already enraged director that real fights would make the film better, so recruits Ken for help. The pair proceed to fight, destroying the film set in the process, resulting in a rather silly episode. In a future episode, he returns in an installment with a more serious tone, whereby he pursues Shadaloo, who he suspects has murdered Chun-Li's father. FeiLong would also feature in the Western cartoon from this time period. Weirdly, in FeiLong's most significant episode in the series, it too would feature a weird plot involving Ken. In this episode, investors withdraw support for FeiLong's movie due to it featuring Chinese criminal syndicates, so they cancel his product altogether. Ken ends up getting his rich father to fund the movie in exchange for Ken to become an executive producer. FeiLong hates the plan but goes along with it anyway. Fame soon goes to Ken's head, making him more arrogant, and the pair end up coming to blows. This results in the pair destroying the set again. Slapstick, silly stuff really. As for the world of gaming, the Street Fighter II prequels known as the Alpha series would begin to be rolled out in 1995, with FeiLong nowhere to be seen. By the second installment, Street Fighter Alpha 2, we still had no FeiLong as a playable character, however he would cameo in the background of Dan Hibiki's stage, watching the action take place. In fact, he wouldn't show up in Street Fighter Alpha 3 in 1998 either. However, he would finally become part of the roster when the home version saw release on the Sony PlayStation, with him also being included in Alpha 3's arcade update known as Alpha 3 Upper. In his character story in this game, it reveals FeiLong's backstory from before the days he competed in the World Warrior Tournament, or even when he was a movie star. In the game, his martial arts skills attract the attention of Shadaloo, who want to recruit him by force. Beating the game as FeiLong and destroying M. Bison's Psycho Drive results in him starring in a film based around the events. This catapults him to superstardom. The next few years would be quiet for the character, missing out on representation in the Marvel vs. Capcom games, Capcom vs. SNK titles, and the Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter EX games. The best it got for our Bruce Lee lookalike was a cameo in the Noodle stage and in Felicia's ending in Super Gem Fighter Minimix. He also had placement in the background of a Hong Kong stage in Capcom Fighting Evolution and placement in a poster that can be found in Resident Evil Survivor. The character was barely being seen compared to his previous success. After over a decade of not being playable, FeiLong would finally return to the fold in Super Street Fighter 4, the update of Street Fighter 4 in the first game of the series to showcase our Kung Fu star in events that chronologically follow the action of Street Fighter 2. It seems that unlike the plot of Street Fighter 2 previously suggested, FeiLong did indeed transition back into a movie career. However, he is not too pleased when he learns that Sin operatives are suspected of attacking stagehands and his co-stars of the film he is working on. So FeiLong sets off on a journey to get revenge against the troublemakers. In this return to action, FeiLong retains the moveset that made him famous, but can now utilise new attacks such as the Tenshin, a manoeuvre that involves hooking an opponent's leg and flipping them over. He can also perform a new Ultra combo, and can counter certain attacks by delivering a hard jump kick to the back of an opponent's leg, followed with a barrage of quick punches, topped off with a devastating 1-inch punch. Yeah! In this new adventure, he encounters Makoto, who wants to fight him to build her dojo's reputation, and later Abel, a man who it transpires is a massive admirer of FeiLong's work. Eventually, he catches up with the man responsible for attacking his crew, Seth. When FeiLong demands answers from Seth for his awful conduct, he spits out words that sound like they came from Vladimir Putin's playbook, stating, "Sometimes the media can get too close to the truth." As he is about to learn more about Seth's agenda, a ninja throwing dagger kills Seth before he can gather any more information. Returning to the film set, he meets Abel once more, who warns him about how dangerous Sin and Shadaloo are. FeiLong though states that's not a problem, wondering where to begin. Past the Street Fighter 4 games, that would just about be the last who would see FeiLong as a playable character up until this point, but he has made a few cameos here and there. This includes being mentioned in passing by Pai-chan within Project X Zone, and a very brief appearance in Rashid's story in Street Fighter 5. In this one, he is reduced to a social media communication with a Middle Eastern character, whereby with his username FeiLong Dragon, he states that his new movie is opening and enthusiastically requests that people go see it. If it's true that FeiLong now cares more about movies and promoting himself on social media, it would not surprise me if FeiLong was now taking money to promote mobile games in his spare time, such as Raid Shadow Dragons, the kung fu game that changed everything. Now, considering how important the career of Bruce Lee and the movie Enter the Dragon are in relation to the existence of Street Fighter 2, it is quite surprising how thin FeiLong's appearances have been over the years in comparison to other fighters from the franchise. People sometimes laugh about this character just being a Bruce Lee ripoff, but so is most of the lore in the franchise overall. Without the success of Bruce Lee and Hong Kong martial arts movies, it is doubtful we would even have fighting games as we know them today. In fact, the whole genre has regularly paid homage to this kung fu movie legend, with the likes of World Heroes, Kim Dragon, Fatal Fury's Hon Fu, Tekken's martial law, just to name a few. Speaking of these clones, one final fact around this video off would involve martial law, who would get to do battle with the cast of Street Fighter within the crossover game Street Fighter Cross Tekken, whereby amusingly, some of the characters in this game mistake him for being FeiLong. But this just further embeds Bruce Lee's legacy within the fighting game scene, to see two of his clones feature in exactly the same story. All in all, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of FeiLong, a character who is clearly and openly a Bruce Lee ripoff, who may be a clone, but a clone who has had an important 29-year legacy in fighting games to call his own, forging somewhat of his own identity along the way in the process. If you enjoyed today's video and want to learn more about various different characters from the Street Fighter universe, I have an entire playlist for you to check out consisting of content just like this. Make sure you like this video, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. All these things will help ensure that as many people get to learn more about FeiLong as possible. Finally, videos like this are in part made possible due to the amazing people who back my work over on Patreon. Speaking of whom, special shout outs go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo, Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corio Marsh Sr., Ron Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Azarakai, Jotkin Varela, Mike Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee, Marinera Liga, TOG Driver, Luis Viant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, and everybody else who backs this channel over on Patreon. Thank you very much.